Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim. Today, let's talk about sequels. I get a lot of questions about sequels. What I think about people making sequels, what I think about sequels that come out much later by other teams. So I thought I'd just talk about like my take on sequels. And I've said this, I've mentioned this in other videos. In general, I don't like making sequels. At least not nearly as much as making something original. If someone gave me a big bag of money, I'd make an original IP. If I had a choice between making an original IP and making a sequel to one of my games, I'd make an original IP. It's not because I don't want to go back to those old IPs. It's mainly because if I've made a game for that world, I've already explored pretty much what I wanted to explore. My games tend to be really big and have a lot of different ways of playing them, which means I've already explored all the different ideas I've had about playing in that IP. So sometimes making a sequel to one of my games feels superfluous. There's nothing more to say, or this would just drag things out, or things that had closure are now being extended past their closure, and it kind of feels like a money grab or a hey, we made a good thing, let's make more of a good thing. It's certainly low risk, but it's not the only reason. That's part of the reason why I didn't want to work on Fallout 2. I mean, I've said this. When Fallout 1 was finished, I didn't think I was going to work on Fallout 2. And remember, for the first couple years I worked on Fallout, I was told, yeah, we just got to get this done, and we're going to put you on something. I remember I was told I was probably going to be put on a D&D game, because that would make money. And then, of course, things changed in the last 6 months to a year with Fallout, and suddenly they wanted a sequel, and I didn't want to do it. And originally there was another team, and eventually I got put on and I was doing it. All I can say is 3.5 years making one game, that's a long time, and you just kind of get tired of it. Now, that isn't to say that I haven't made games in other people's IPs. I made Temple of Elemental Evil in Greyhawk for D&D. I made Vampire Bloodlines, which is in the White Wolf vampire setting, World of Darkness. I made South Park, and that certainly wasn't anything I expected to be doing, but I found myself immersed in the South Park IP, watching some of the episodes. I'd watched a ton of them, watching more, talking to people about what we wanted to do. But one thing I'll make clear is that was my first time in all of those IPs as video games. I played in Greyhawk. I played Temple of Elemental Evil. I ran a party through it. But that was my first time making a game in those IPs. So I got to explore the stuff I wanted to explore in a video game in that other person's IP. And I think you have to be very respectful of that IP. It's why I was really happy on Temple I got to talk to Gary Gygax, because there were lots of questions I had about Temple, and I wanted to do it right. And I know that game was my lowest scoring game, but I am happy with how it kind of honors the memory of Temple. If I were to do it now, I would probably throw some things out, increase the narrative in other places, kind of connect things together better. I've talked about that in the Temple remake. But just so you know, I did make IPs along the way in my career that I fully intended to make sequels for, because they were built to make sequels for. The first one was Arcanum. When you start Arcanum, you are coming to a new continent to look for work. You hear there's jobs. You don't know much else. And it's the perfect way of starting a game so that the player character and the character both don't know anything. Same thing is coming out of, being frozen in Outer Worlds, or coming out of your vault in Fallout. So we had a bunch of stories we still wanted to tell about Arcanum. We told so many stories, but we couldn't possibly touch them all. I know a lot of you want the gnome story continued. Want to know what was happening to other dwarf clans, what was going on with other elf groups, how the Industrial Revolution continued. Those kind of things we had stories for, and I've talked about what would have been in Arcanum 2, Journey to the Center of Arcanum. So we had stories, we had plans for that. Similarly, when I picked up the D&D license and they said I could make any module I want, I picked Temple because I fully expected Temple to be part one of implementing the entire GDQ series, which was the Giants, the Descent into the Depths, and the Queen of the Demonwood Pits. They're always called GDQ. It worked perfectly. Temple would get you to level 10, then you play the Giants, then you play Descent, and you'd finally do Queen of the Demonwood Pits, and end up somewhere, I don't know, level 18 or 20, I don't know. That was a plan. If Temple had been successful, I would have really pushed for that. And finally, The Outer Worlds was designed from scratch to make sequels not only possible, but desirable if the game did well, and it did. So we literally added descriptions, sometimes just one line, sometimes a paragraph, of other colonies and what their, who founded them, what the planet was roughly like, what their resources were like, to give an idea, if you wanted to make a sequel, what the life might be like on that colony would be very different than Halcyon, which is important because Earth had, expanded and made a bunch of colonies, and they're not like Halcyon. Halcyon was its own unique, special, super distant, two different terraformable worlds, its own unique local fauna, the problem with growing food. Those were all unique to Halcyon. But there were so many other colonies to explore, plus Earth. Earth would be a whole thing unto itself, running around what Earth would be like in the future like that. So let me try to sum up my idea of sequels. First of all, they're never off the table for me. It's just, they're not my first choice, especially right away. If I've just done a game, I kind of prefer to shift gears and do a different kind of game. Even if it means, we talked about moving Arcanum into being first person. That would be an interesting thing to do, to make Arcanum from a third person to a first person game. It's why when we were doing Vampire, I was really excited because Vampire was my first time going into C++, first time making a first person game. It was my first time in World of Darkness. So it had a lot of cool things about it. I understand because of that, because of Temple and Bloodlines and South Park, I understand the difficulty of making a game in someone else's IP. You want to be respectful. In South Park, we wanted to be respectful for the humor and the characters. In Temple, we wanted to be respectful to the setting and the mechanics. In Bloodlines, we wanted to be respectful to the masquerade, to the story of the vampires and what they were doing now, and the fact that there were a lot of other supernatural creatures. So there was a lot of stuff to take in and understand. So I think when people make sequels, I hope they want to do that. I dislike heartily sequels and remakes that throw too much out. I'm not even going to point to a lot of very recent TV shows that have done that, which makes me scared for future TV shows. I think they were disrespectful to the source material, either in one of two ways. Either they took things that were established and threw them out, or they were so desperate to add their own things into the IP that they jammed it in there and made this very modern sensibility, and they jammed it into an older IP to make it fit, even though it didn't really belong there. So I think when you make a sequel, you have to be very respectful of the source material. I'm not saying you can't modernize it, but by modernize it, I mean show it in a better, for games, it's, better graphics, better UI, extend the basic ideas of the game into things that weren't considered an issue back then, but are issues now. I think people who do it respectfully make really good sequels, and people who don't, they end up making a sequel and they don't sometimes understand why people don't like it. And sometimes the people complaining don't understand why they don't like it. So this is dumb, this is bad, this is horrible, this writing is terrible. Because they don't understand what the person was trying to do. And so they tend to talk past each other. And that's one of the dangers of making a sequel, is people already have a pre-established idea of what you're making. One thing I love about an original IP is you can't have a pre-established notion, and so you have to take whatever I give you as this is how it is. But the main reason I like making original IP is it's challenging, I find it really fun, and it lets me explore things I couldn't do in my previous games. So yes, I'd make a sequel. No, it would never be my first choice. And that's pretty much all my ideas on sequels.